Greetings, abstraction students. Welcome to week number 4. This week we will be focusing on the work of Matisse, the group that he was associated with, the Fauves, um, the so-called wild beasts that painted in garish colors. We'll look at the role of expression in abstraction. And essentially, it's the influence of Matisse. Next week, we'll be looking at Picasso. So this week, it's the focus on color and expression. Next week, it is Picasso's focus on structure. But as you see, there'll be a close relationship between Matisse and Picasso. In your email today, I've included a manuscript that I had submitted for an exhibition essay, for an exhibition catalog that focused on German Expressionism. And I should have given it to you last week, but I didn't think of it. So I've attached it to the email. It's something that I thought you might be interested in. It's how I was thinking about German Expressionism in relationship to theology and religion, and the death of God, and how the visual arts were mobilized as a response to deal with the crisis of the First World War and the turmoil in Germany subsequent to it. So I hope you find it of interest. One of the things I want to emphasize with the role of the development of abstraction is that it emerges not just when the artist is not just by the fact that the artist is deciding to express him or herself in a unique way. It occurs when the artist is two aspects in which the artist is participating in an artistic practice that is not defined by the academic structure of official art, with the hierarchy of genres, with a particular way of understanding line, color, and form, and subject matter, and the relationship to nature. This is important because in the academic tradition, nature is not observed directly. The artist is idealizing, perfecting, taking the imperfections and the transients in the ephemeral nature, or the ephemeral state of nature, and perfecting it, idealizing it, universalizing it, crystallizing it into a unchanging presence of the good, the true, and the beautiful. As the artist moves from the studio in the academy out into nature, taking their canvas out into nature, they bear the climate, bugs and heat, and what they are observing begins to change due to light and shadow and their optical observance. But as they are looking more closely at nature and painting nature as they see it and feel it, what it is they're observing becomes much more complicated. And so we see this with Monet and the Impressionists, in which the paintings then, the colors become brighter because what they are doing is looking at and trying to record optical observance. So shadows can be purple and violet and pink. They're working quickly to record their impressions. And so the brushstrokes aren't disguised, aren't waxed over and smoothed over as they are in the academic tradition, but they remain gritty. They remain still paint strokes on the surface. Moreover, the space that's opened up in the traditional Western pictorial tradition that the academic tradition preserved, using line to produce linear perspective, which opened up that picture plane, with the work of the Impressionists, with artists that are going out into nature and painting, that space begins to shrink, and the space becomes even more becomes shallow. And the illusion of 3 dimensions, the illusion of an open space, begins to dissolve. And so in Monet, a sunrise, the sun in the background seems to occupy, seems to press forward in a way that it seems to operate even in the foreground of a painting. And so the relationship of the foreground to the middle ground, the background, become dissolved, become ambiguous. And so the painting can be read as simply a collection of brushstrokes. And many hostile critics were very quick to pick up on this and condemn this. Now that kind of ephemerality, transience, the focus on the entrance of time into the very structure of painting, contradicted the timelessness of painting from the Renaissance tradition that was preserved in the academic tradition. And then the work of some of the post-impressionists like Seurat and Cézanne and Van Gogh attempted to do more, to take that language, to take that developing impressionist language with the color palette and begin to give it more structure, to go further than just recording optical observance and the optical sensation that the eye captures, to give structure. Cézanne famously said that he wants to paint structure, and that his advice to young painters is to paint the cylinder and the square and the circle, the focused basic shapes, to give a certain architectural structure. And Van Gogh wanted to inject a kind of spiritual presence, a personal presence, emotional presence. All of this does is it continues to reduce the pictorial surface. From a formal standpoint, the pictorial surface then becomes tighter and it shrinks. And there's less space, you could say, for the viewer's eye to go in. And so the pictorial surface remains flat, or becomes more flat. And this is something that Matisse takes up, and Matisse takes up the pictorial, or the high-pitched color. And for Matisse, everything that is taking place on the surface is taking place on the surface. And so the wallpaper designs in an interior space push to the foreground in the same way that the figures that he paints. Now, even though Matisse doesn't paint non-objectively, his abstraction works with the basic structure of the figure in the landscape, or the figure in the interior. And usually it is the female nude, so a traditional Western pictorial device, the subject matter that implied desire and beauty and erotics and attraction, and the connection of creativity and poetry and art with sexuality. All of that is what Matisse is working with. And Matisse is interested in finding a certain kind of symphonic unity between these disparate components: female figure, decoration, color, and to find color harmonies. Matisse spent much of his adult life in the south of France, in Nice, as he said, chasing light. His goal was to paint light and to find color and form in a way that would capture that. And he talked about it continually as a source of frustration, a burden, that he was chained to his canvases. Now, one of the problems that Matisse's abstractions faced, given that he was making this work at such a tumultuous time culturally, that many critics condemned his work as decorative, as refusing to take a stand in culture, escapist. That as he's working during the First World War, the Second World War, painting during the Nazi occupation of Paris, none of his work reflected a political or a social dimension. Now, Matisse was adamant in saying that he felt that, he experienced it. In fact, his daughter was very active in the resistance and had been captured by the Nazis and tortured. But nonetheless, Matisse's work, in many ways, reveals certain weaknesses of abstraction. And that is, what is interesting in the development of abstraction, the development of modern artistic practice from, we could say, Courbet in the 1850s, the shifts in subject matter, the shift in pictorial style, are not just artistic innovations. They have political resonance. They imply a critique of the state. So within the French context, to be an abstract painter is to inherently take a political stance and a radical social stance to the state. Yet one of the problems with abstraction is that it can often simply be read as decoration. That it can become disengaged from that political and social context and simply be seen as an iteration of a stylistic or an artistic evolution or development or the exercise of artistic freedom. Now, one of the ways that this happens is through the work of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. Founded in 1929 in the United States, whose own history with the visual arts is, and particularly with modern art, was shallow at best. But the connection between art and politics didn't exist in anywhere near what it did as it did in Paris. Artistic practice was inherently political in Paris, or in France in the 19th century especially. And visual imagery and visual culture was mobilized in a particularly strong way during the French Revolution and then the various revolutions and insurrections and the like in the 19th century in Paris. In the United States, it doesn't exist in the same way. Revolution in Paris, in France, is a social and cultural as well as political manifestation. In the United States, the revolution was one based on taxes, was one based on a political liberation. So the Museum of Modern Art was, in many ways, you could say, a non-political institution, and its focus, the founding director Alfred Barr's focus, was on making the development of modern art understandable for a broader public. You could say that he was the first historian of modern art, provided the first taxonomy of modern art, and it was purely artistic, purely aesthetic. It had to do with the internal development of art, not art's relationship to particular cultural phenomenon or political phenomenon or means by which culture was transformed. However, Barr did see modern art as a response to modern life in general, and that it preserved and celebrated aspects of human freedom, which during the mid-century, the mid-20th century, during the Cold War, that and the growth of totalitarian regimes throughout Europe was of major concern. And so human freedom, the autonomy of human freedom and human expression, was seen in the context of being under threat. And yet the overall aspect in terms of the development of modern art is a purely stylistic one. So the question then is, Matisse's abstractions, are they, and painting brightly colored, quote unquote, pretty nudes, serve to turn people's heads from the turmoil and social and ethical and political responsibility, public responsibility, for the sake of private devotion and veneration to the art? And I think that's a significant question to consider. And so for the artist, and certainly I would suggest to you that Matisse didn't feel that way. That Matisse's work was the product of his deep anxiety and deep fear, and attempt to reconcile himself with the world. And one could say something like a religious or a theological manner. But that it takes effort on the part of artists or critics to maintain that connection. To maintain a context in which the work can be seen as relevant, meaningful, powerful expressions, and not simply mere decoration. But what's significant about Matisse, his use of color, is that color is the compositional core. He's composing in color. And color is emotional. It's supra-rational. You can't define it. You can't conceptualize it. And for those of you that paint, the mysticism and magic of mixing color to find that particular kind of color, and the constant search for color is a reality that Matisse takes as the subject matter. And the challenge of trying to paint what is seen and felt, and to do so in a way that makes a painting that holds together as its own experience. This week I'm also assigning you your first writing assignment. The longer writing assignment is I call it a midterm writing reflection. It's about 1,000 words. I just want you to find a theme or an idea, or even an artist that has piqued your interest, that you want to focus more time on, maybe something that may end up forming the nucleus of your final paper. But give me something. I'd like something extended, something the beginning to an initial takeaway that you want to that has been of interest to you that you want to focus on might be that thread that moves through the rest of the remaining weeks that we have of this class. So anyway, let me know if you have any questions. I am anxious to get to read your discussion prompts from last week, and for me, it's good to be back in warm South Florida after spending a week in bitter cold New York City and wet at the end of the week, and windy. I did go to the Metropolitan Museum's exhibition from their permanent collection called Epic Abstraction, and it was quite interesting. I really enjoyed it. I'm teaching a 1-hour practicum for my King's College students on curatorial practices, and so we met at the Met, and I walked them around, and we talked about curating exhibitions, particularly exhibitions from permanent collections, as that exhibition is. And I've included a few photographs, a few pictures of work that I took of Matisse's that I found at the Met that you might find of interest, and a few other pictures I took of the Abstraction Show, which I actually may have already sent you those with my Friday video chat. But I've also provided a link to Peter Sheldall's review of the exhibition in the New Yorker, and I think that's something that might be of interest to you. So write me this week if you have any questions, and we're really getting into the teeth of this subject, and I'm spending a lot of time thinking about it, and I really am enjoying the time that we're able to spend together. Again, my only regret is that we cannot sit around a seminar table in person and have conversations in person. So anyway, have a great week, and I look forward to connecting with you through email and then on Friday with my video chat. Take care.